This week's episode is sponsored by Pelican.
You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For 50 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Alan Weitz.
Greetings and welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. My name is Alan Weitz.
And I'm Jill Waterman.
Lynn Goldsmith believes creativity can make anything possible. This belief system has fueled her remarkable accomplishments across multiple artistic mediums, from the music portrait she's best known for to being the youngest member ever inducted into the Directors Guild of America, to her own groundbreaking music career as Will Powers and beyond. Yet Lynn now has one more major triumph to add to her list. Friday, March 15th, 2024, a day some of you might recognize as the Ides of March, marked the official resolution of her landmark copyright lawsuit with the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts. As one of the most noteworthy fights for artist rights in recent memory, this David and Goliath battle went all the way to the Supreme Court. In 2017, we spoke with Lynn about her extensive long-term work with the band Kiss, among other crazy stories, and it was a fan favorite. We invited her back to the show in 2022 when the Supreme Court first agreed to hear this case, but heeding the advice of her legal counsel, she wisely declined our offer at the time. Now that the final resolution has been signed, sealed, and delivered, we're incredibly honored to have her join us today for a recap of this complex 7+ year battle straight from the source. Lynn Goldsmith, once again, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. I always appreciate your thinking of me as someone that your listeners will enjoy hearing from. And I really appreciate when you open it up by announcing, which is actually, my purpose in life, is to let others know that anything is possible. And that's the way you have to think in order to achieve any kind of pathway towards your dream.
It's a great piece of advice. I remembered it from the last show. And there's one other kind of a piece of advice that's kind of similar to that, and it's from Harvey Fierstein. And it goes, when offered a choice to go yes or no, always say yes. Because once you say no, you're cutting off all your possibilities. But once you say yes, you can move forward. And it's the same kind of positive attitude that you have there. All right? It's about believing. It's about doing. It's about growing. And it's great stuff. Okay, Lynn, well, we have a bunch of questions, and let's start with the most important one, the primary one of today's discussion. The portrait you took of Prince, the photograph under question, was a black and white photograph taken during a studio shoot in 1981. It was relatively early in Prince's career, and from what we understand, at some point he became uncomfortable about something around the camera and locked himself in a dressing room. It's what I would do, which in turn limited the number of pictures you were able to take that time. How many shots were you able to get off during that session? And you can give us some kind of a backstory to all of this?
Well, first of all, I never count my pictures. That's not what making pictures is about for me. I keep shooting until I feel I have it. And Prince was not angry or upset about anything. What you pointed out was that it was early in his career, and he was a very shy person. Many of the entertainers that I have photographed who come out on stage just bursting with energy, and you think that they're live wires, and that they'll walk into your studio that way. They're not. They're actually very quiet people. And Prince didn't lock himself in. What happened was, when I start to shoot with anybody at that time, I always shoot in black and white, even though magazines were utilizing color photographs, not black and white ones. And the reason being is because I not only love black and white and like to print in the darkroom, but oftentimes in the past, I have drawn and painted on my photographs. One was a Patti LaBelle cover. Patti LaBelle's band, who was very well known at the time, 3 girls who dressed up like they were from another planet. that's an album cover that shows clearly my artwork that I would do on my black and whites. I also did that with the B-52s. This is just something that I love to do. But because I was shooting for Newsweek, they expect color pictures. So after I shot a roll or so of black and white, I went into the color. And during that time, Prince asked if he could go to the dressing room for something. I said, sure. And he went in there and closed the door. I figured maybe he's changing his clothes. And we waited and waited, and he didn't come out. So I went and knocked on the door and went inside, and he was sitting on the couch, very quiet. And I sat down next to him and I said, is everything okay? And he didn't answer. And I said, okay. So is it my breath? Do I have bad breath? Assuming that hopefully my sense of humor, which in the past has enabled me to oftentimes get close to people, would work in this situation. And he didn't laugh. And I said, Prince, are you okay? And he just looked at me, and he was just really nervous and scared. And I said, listen, I got enough. You don't have to do anymore. I had shot a few rolls of color because when I do a studio shoot, obviously there's prep involved. So I light it for for what I want to get. And I have the person step into an environment that is already one that was within my control. So I didn't want to torture this guy. And I was going to see him again later. We were going to do documentary type images, and I was going to go to the show. So that's what happened during that session.
Got it.
Wow.
I just have to pull back for one thing. I'm fascinated by one aspect of it. This all happened in the day of film. If you wanted to shoot color in black and white today, it's no big deal. You shoot, RGB, and conversions are easy, and the quality is lovely on it. That was not the case necessarily when shooting film, even with Kodachrome, the finest grain color slide film. When you converted it to black and white, it was kind of a mushy kind of a texture to it. It did not have the same life and luster of an original black and white negative. Yet, here you are on assignment for a magazine to get a color photograph, yet you are starting everything in black and white. I would have done the reverse. I would have made sure that I felt comfortable that I had the client's picture before I satisfied my own needs, which is great to do whenever you can. You're doing the reverse, and I'm fascinated by that.
Well, the reason for doing that is because it takes time for a person who is not a model
To warm up.
Yeah.
To feel comfortable. Yep.
And so if I was doing an assignment for National Geographic and I'm out there, I'm shooting color. And when I have my color, then I will shoot black and white. So it really depended on what my purposes were.
Gotcha.
But you always shot both, right? That's something I didn't know about you until recently.
Yeah, I always shot both, just like in those days. Well, by that time, I think there might have been zoom lenses, but no, when I started making pictures, you had to have one camera with a long lens, one camera with a wide angle, one camera for color. So basically, I wore 5 cameras around my neck.
Right.
Yeah.
Not in the studio, but, if I was working on the street or in a concert, any other environment than the studio.
Yeah.
Just look at any combat photographer. That's what they were doing.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah. Well, now they don't have to do
that's a whole
that.
different world.
And,
It's a lot easier right now. It is a lot easier. Plus, you actually know what you have when you leave, which you didn't back then. But again, we could wander off on that one all we want. Now, you were shooting on assignment for Newsweek for this particular project, but the magazine never ran. Any of the pictures that you captured that day, were any of the photographs that you took on that day used for other purposes or other publications before That black and white print was sent over to Vanity Fair in 1984 for the artist reference request.
The magazine did run a photograph from the concert that I took that night.
Ah, okay.
You know, they got a range of material, and like any publication, when they lay it out, they look at like what fits in the spread, what did the writer write, and they have a range. And one of the reasons that I would get so much work from Time and Newsweek is because I presented them with so many options when I worked. So they got studio, they got documentary, and concert.
They got choice.
Yeah. Location portraits, studio portraits. Because I work pretty quickly, artists generally respond quite well. And we can make it fun if we keep it moving.
Gotcha.
Once Newsweek ran their story, it's common in the editorial world, because you don't get paid that much money, that you will place those pictures in other publications, which I did. So the color pictures had appeared in places, but the black and white, which I consider personal, stayed in my files.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, you didn't see this 1984 Vanity Fair cover, and you were unaware of the illustration Warhol created using this particular picture until you discovered another variation published by Vanity Fair as part of a Prince tribute in 2016. We're talking decades later. How long did it take you to realize Warhol had referenced your portrait and it tracked down the original license and other elements and sort of pieced all this together?
In 1984, when Vanity Fair called the photo agency LGI that I owned, and it represented about 300 photographers, they asked for a submission of images to be considered for artist illustration. Now, this was a common practice in 1984 because the internet was not what it is now. And so publications from Rolling Stone to Esquire, a range of them would often call requesting images for artist illustration. So when Vanity Fair called, I assume they called for black and white because I do save all the paperwork, and I'll get on to that, okay? There were 25 employees at LGI. The person who handled that account obviously went in the files and submitted an 11 by 14 black and white image that I made in the darkroom that were in the drawers in my office. In 1984, I was very busy in Europe because at the end of 83, my Will Powers record had been released, and I had a top 10 single with a song called Kissing with Confidence. And I was touring and being in places. But even if I'd been in the USA, I don't look at every magazine which might have my pictures. My photographs are in publications by that point in time all over the world. And I'm just moving forward. So I never even knew that there was a license to Vanity Fair. Cut to 2016 when Prince dies. First, I see some things on the internet, and then I went to the grocery store and I saw what is called a bookazine. And it's often when someone dies, they put out something that is called a magazine, but is like a book of pictures and stories of one individual.
That's what you find at the checkout counters in the grocery. That's where they usually stack them all. They're just staring at you as you're waiting for the person in front of you to find their coupons.
Yeah. I took a picture of it and it looked familiar to me. There was just something, and I thought, I know those eyes. There's a lot of things I forget, but what I don't forget are the eyes of the people that I've photographed. And I put that picture into Google Images, and up came Vanity Fair's 1984 article. And so I went down into my archive of invoices because those are legal licenses of rights. And I looked under Vanity Fair, and there it was, an invoice for the use of one 11 by 14 black and white print for illustration to be used one time only in one print publication dated November, whatever it was, 1984. And my credit, Lynn Goldsmith, had to appear with the illustrators. And that was it. So when I looked at the Vanity Fair article online from 1984, my credit was there. In the federal court filing that the Warhol Foundation made, somebody wiped it out. It's not there. So then I went looking for my consignment forms, and I found that with the date on it, and that they had gotten this 11 by 14 for artist illustration. There was never any mention of that artist being Andy Warhol. And that was common. You know, when you submitted for Rolling Stone or Esquire, they didn't tell you the name of the illustrator. You know, they just said, we're going to use it for illustration because it's a different fee-based structure.
I was just going to ask you about that. Now, again, if they're buying a photograph that's going to be used in the publication, be it as an insert or a cover or a spread, you get paid X amount of dollars. But if, say, an illustration is being used in that same size based on your photograph, you get a lesser fee. It's basically just a partial fee, correct?
I wouldn't call it that. First of all, they're not buying, they're licensing.
Yes, okay. Mm-hmm.
Because an illustrator's job is to negotiate his own deal, right? Condé Nast certainly is not allowed to give rights that they don't have. And they certainly didn't have the right. It was very clear on the invoice, which is the license of rights, that it could only be used one time in one print publication. And my invoices even used to say how it can't be kept in the files. There's a range of things. You can't do this, you can't do that. You can't reprint ever without our permission. It goes on, just to make it clear what the fee entitles them to do. Anyway, when I had the invoice and the consignment form in hand and scanned them, I called up the Warhol Foundation and spoke with a very nice person, explained that it had just come to my attention that my photograph has been used, I believe, without my permission. And I'm sending them in email a copy of the licenses, a copy of the consignment form, and I would like to have a talk with them about how we can come to an amicable resolving. And then I heard back from them that they wanted to know what I wanted. Now, this is not unusual when people use your work. You know, I come from a place where first I do whatever it is I can to amicably resolve it because, you know, the infringing parties might not even really know they infringed. And you try to work it out. And so they asked me what I wanted. And I said, I didn't think we should have that conversation until I knew all of the different uses that were made of it. I had no idea who else they'd licensed it to, if they made artwork out of it. Like, why don't you just put together a list that's complete so that when we have our conversation and hopefully we come to an agreement, there won't be anything else out there that I would find which would make me come back to you.
I have to just take note of one thing. I'm listening you to describe how you're going back decades to dig up paperwork to go with a very simple job, just another little project that just goes through your company. It's small, it's nothing major, yet you had all this paperwork on it. And I'm really curious to know what percentage of our listeners, those who actually do this for a living, create content for a living, photography, illustration, be whatever it is, would be able to go back in their files as far back as you did and retrieve very detailed contracts and licensing agreements that you can come back with. I would say that maybe 10%, 15% would be able to do that. I mean, that says a lot about you and your methodology. And again, that's what being a professional is. It's noteworthy.
Well, it's not just being a professional. First of all, these are times where most photographers are syndicated by an agency and they don't really know the legal language, the rights that the agency has given to the user. They only know where their image is sold and how much they're getting for it. I never wanted to go down that path. It's not a matter of the money or anything else, especially when you do celebrity portraiture. I care a great deal about where those images are being licensed to, what the rights are, because I feel a responsibility to the people who have stood in front of my camera and trusted me. And so that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is I feel that when you make work, which is the enjoyable part, that you need to take care of it. It's not unlike what I would imagine women who bear children feel. You had a kid, take care of it. You might not want to, be picking them up from school every day because you've got other things you want to do. But you take care of it. And I have always felt that I needed to be respectful to the work.
Yeah.
And so that motivated me to save every license and to be able to control where they would go and how they would be used.
Understood. But by the way, I think it's important to take note, in case there's any confusion, that all of these actions were taken by the Warhol Foundation, not by Andy Warhol himself, who passed away in 1987. And correct me if I'm wrong, but if anything, you and Andy were friends, and you personally believe that he never would have taken the legal action that his foundation did. Namely, after all of this trying to make nice with them, they turned around and sued you, filing a preemptive lawsuit in the New York federal court on the basis of the fair use doctrine. And then you turned around and countersued them. What was the time frame, and can you give us, just fill us in on all this?
So where I left off was I'm waiting to get a list of the variety of uses so that we can have this conversation. And we are now living in a time where if you sue another person, that person has to retain legal help to respond. And many individuals are afraid, and I can't blame them, of what those legal costs might amount to. And so they either walk away or they shut up, they go away. And I was getting madder and madder at that because I felt it was happening more and more. I felt like I grew up at a different period of time in American history where lawsuits were not being thrown everywhere at people to get them to settle or to get them to walk away. And, it was a surprise to me. I was waiting to talk with them, but they filed what's called a preemptive lawsuit. And in that lawsuit, they said some things in that federal court filing that really pushed my buttons. My buttons were already pushed because those documents go out to the press everywhere around the world. And then it gets repeated in newspapers and online. It was that I was trying to extort them. And I thought, what? I never mentioned a dime. How could I? I didn't know the uses. And then, as I said in the federal court document, they wiped out my credit line. They stated that the Prince image was a publicity picture, intimating, in my opinion, that it was thus in the public domain, which it was not. And they knew it wasn't a publicity picture because they'd gotten both my invoice and in the consignment form. And so there were a number of things in that federal court filing that I just said, no more bullying, no more lies. It seems like nobody knows what truth is anymore.
Well, one question I just want to ask quickly. You mentioned that they said that it was a publicity still, therefore it's open season. Is that true? If you shot that and it was being used as a publicity, would this have been just a moot point?
Yes and no. I'll explain. There are photographers who worked for, whether it's movie companies or record labels, did what's called work for hire, in which case they don't own their work, okay? But on the photographs of mine, of which there are quite a few that were used as publicity pictures, the license, depending on the fee, because the more rights, the higher the fee. Generally speaking, read for use for 1 year in connection with this particular named album. So there was a time limit on it and that my credit had to be there. Sometimes it was left off and I would send a notice, but all those records were kept. So I have never done a work for hire. And my images, which have been licensed for publicity, or if I have been hired to do a publicity picture, then in the agreement of my hire, it very clearly tells what the rights are. Bottom line is many photographers have resisted focusing on the business aspect of making art. And they just sort of want to be published or they want to make friends with somebody. I don't know. I'm not them. But it's very difficult because particularly in these days, so many photographers do that. The buyers seem to think or want you to believe that that's normal. And that's just not acceptable to me. And I wish there were ways of getting photographers to want to be educated. And in part now, I think anytime you license to a publication, whether it's the New York Times or Condé Nast, no matter what you do, you get these contracts put in front of you. And most of these people didn't go to school to learn how to read contracts. But that's the world we live in today. So pay attention to the contracts you're getting. And they send out ones that then, if you say, well, I really can't agree to this and I can't agree to that, so maybe we're not on the same page and you can't use it. And they say, oh, no. That's our boilerplate one. That's the one we send out to everyone. So they're waiting for you to cross things out or to complain. But if you don't, they're grabbing rights. That's the world that has become dominant. There are no longer, for the most part, photo editors like there were when I worked at Life magazine and other publications where the director of photography and many of the photo editors would fight with the publication to get you as much as you could because they understood what it is you went through to make your pictures. When I made my photographs of prints in the studio, you get a day rate against space. And so they don't pay for my studio. They don't pay for my assistants. They don't pay for my lighting. That's my investment because I know that I will be able to license those pictures to magazines or maybe the record label or, to other places to generate income. And maybe what you're being paid is just covering your base costs. It's a very expensive proposition, even more so, I think, today, to be a photographer. Not only does equipment cost so much more, but the amount of equipment that you need outside of camera equipment, the computer programs that you need, the subscriptions that you have to have in order to use certain programs, the cost of education to learn how to use various tools so that you can archive your pictures properly, so that if you want, you can retouch them properly. This is much greater than in my day where your, let's say, Nikon 5 lasted you for like 5 years. Every year, every camera company makes better and better cameras. So after a very short period of time, you want that new piece of equipment. It wasn't like that coming up. So I feel it's even more important now than ever that photographers really put as much education time into the legal aspects of what their work is worth, as much as they put into the education of how to use various tools in making photographs that people are going to want.
Yeah. Another thing about this case that's a very slippery slope is the fair use doctrine, which has always been a really problematic part of copyright law.
Well, no, that's not really so. Fair use has 4 factors that determine what is fair use. And in the past, I would say 20 years, when more and more infringements were happening, photographers, not even photographers, lawyers, felt that they could make money going after people. So they will work on contingency. Oftentimes, when a photographer pursues an infringement and they either can't afford or don't want to pay the lawyer, they will have that lawyer work on contingency because it doesn't cost them anything. And those lawyers might not be really top-notch lawyers. And they end up fighting in court top-notch lawyers. And so cases have been lost, which kept on diluting the question not only of what is fair use, but what is transformative under the fair use aspect of the copyright law. And as this dilution happened with more and more rulings, which I considered very poor rulings, those rulings stand in place unless a higher court rules otherwise. So that also was a factor in my wanting to fight this, was because I felt that we had gotten to a place with legal rulings in lower courts that we were getting dangerously close to the fact that there might not be a copyright law at all that's effective. So that was part of my mission in battling this, was to tighten up the definition of what is transformative under the fair use aspect.
What about the aspect of copyright registration for the image?
Well, that's where I fail. In that, I know all about how if you register your copyrights, you are entitled to $150,000 per infringement of what's called statutory damages. It also calls for the fact that when you win the lawsuit, all of your legal fees are reimbursed. I've made a lot of pictures, and I did not have a system by which after every shoot, everything went to Washington, D.C. to get registered. I didn't think I had to protect everything. You do have to register it before you begin a lawsuit.
Right. So at what point, once Warhol Foundation sued you, you then registered the copyright to the image?
I might have done it right before. I don't remember it exactly.
Or once you found out about
once I found out, I registered.
Yeah.
But I registered it too late to be able to get...
Well, you had to register it as a published work rather than an unpublished work, correct?
Well, it's questionable. It was an illustration.
Right.
However, he did do drawings and other things that look more like tracings, and just black and white without any of the color that he's known for adding.
Right. Yeah.
All right, this seems like an excellent time to take a short break for traffic and weather, and we come back more with Lynn Goldsmith and all of this legal stuff having to do with photography and how to protect oneself. Stay tuned.
Carry all your photo and video gear safely through any weather with the Pelican 1510 TP carry-on case. The unbreakable case is made from a high-impact copolymer and features double latches, padlock protectors, and a pressure valve for the ultimate protection. The Pelican 1510 TP includes the TrekPack divider system, consisting of pre-installed wall sections, panels, and divider material that can be cut to your preferred configuration. The dividers are waterproof and the lid is lined with foam, so your gear will have all-around protection. And it currently meets FAA carry-on requirements, making travel easy. Head on over to bnh.com for more information about the Pelican 1510 TP carry-on case with the TrekPack divider system, or use the link in our podcast show notes.
Okay, we are back with Lynn Goldsmith, and we're talking about her legal entanglements with a photograph she took of Prince many years ago that was reused without her permission by the Andy Warhol Foundation. So, Lynn, what did you do after you got that federal lawsuit filing? This wasn't just a little, let's go and take care of this for under $3,000. We can go and get our money and leave. This is a big deal. So what happened after that? What was your next move?
Well, I called them up and said, what's going on? And I said that I guess at this point, it wasn't going to be me just speaking with them, and that I wanted them to know that my attorney, Joel Hecker, would be in touch with them to hopefully figure this out. I was in Colorado at the time. The Andy Warhol Foundation is in New York, as is Joel Hecker. And I said to them, if Joel comes up there to have a meeting with you, I don't want you to perceive it that I'm being hostile. I want you to know that he's there to speak on my behalf, and that I do think I need to have a lawyer there, but I'm not there anyway, so someone has to come. And they said, sure, they would meet with Joel. And Joel called me when he was in a meeting with them about how to resolve this. And they said that they were willing to drop the lawsuit against me if I would accept, I think it was $15,000, and give them my copyright.
Ooh.
So,
Really? Wow.
well, that's what I was trying to explain to you. This is the world now. And what happens is they try to scare you with legal fees. So on top of that, they also said that should I not take the deal, that I should know that they would fight this all the way to the Supreme Court. So that even if I won in federal court, they would appeal and they would continue to appeal. And, that was basically saying to me, we are a very rich foundation. And I asked Joel at the time, how much did he think would it cost to go all the way to the Supreme Court? And he said it was like in the millions. And I felt like I had to fight this. And I thought about it. And as a big fan of GoFundMe.com, because I think that site has created not only awareness of whether it's products, but people in need, a range of things. So I thought, I'm really sick of people just taking rights. I'm sick of this bullying. And so I'm going to look up how many professional photographers there are in this country alone. And the information that I got was 190,000. And I thought, I'll start a GoFundMe. And if I can get everybody to give like $10, just of the professional photographers, much less other kinds of artists, because this affects particularly visual artists, because nowadays it's so easy to take anything off of the internet. And so I thought, in my Pollyanna way, that I would start this GoFundMe and point out to photographers and everybody else who's interested on my GoFundMe, not only what this means, but how easy it is for the work to be taken and how that not only affects you, but affects your heirs. So I said, well, I'm going for it, Joel. Feeling like, oh yeah, I'm going to be, I'm going to be like Nan Golden, who got the Sackler name removed from all the museums and fought the good fight. And I thought I'd be able to do that. I'm laughing because I worked so hard at that. And by the time I was 7 years into it, I had 150 donors. Since I have won the case, I think there's about 370. But I always made clear that the contribution that anyone made was to pay for legal fees that I felt was our fight. And that in getting into this, because I had been warned by Joel, much less I checked with other lawyers, that I was beyond the statute of limitations to get anything on the paintings, which I knew now existed because in the federal court filing, they have pictures of 16 of them. Until I saw the federal court filing, I did not know what they had. So there was no way my legal costs would be reimbursed because I didn't register in a timely way. And there was no way that even if I did win, I would be able to recoup the legal fees. But I thought if I could get, even more than 190,000, we can create a legal fund, which will help photographers like myself who are being more or less bullied by deep-pocketed corporations, foundations, individuals to stand up for their rights. And unfortunately, I thought there was a photographer community. I don't anymore. And that was the most disheartening thing about the whole process, realizing that the way that most photographers, much less visual artists, unlike musicians, unlike writers who have unions that join together, that what we have is the small kind of groups that we have, whether it's ASMP, that at the time the lawsuit started was only 4,000 members, or WPPI, who has 40,000 members. You know, what I did in going to these organizations was really present a letter, which my lawyers had approved, which explained what was going on and why I wanted them to go to the GoFundMe and to donate $10. I was not asking WPPI or any organization for money unless they want to give money. I'll take it. ASMP did, but all the others said to me, no, we can't send this letter to our membership. We will consider it if you join WPPI. And I was like, are you joking?
Wow.
You're supposed to be protecting your photographers. This is one of the most important protections they could have, and we should all stand together. Well, I worked at this for a very long time. It took way too much of my time and really angered and depressed me almost more than the Warhol Foundation, because I'd get all these go Lynn, oh, great, you won at the next level, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. Yeah. And it's like, thanks for your thanks. But where's your contribution? Were you standing with me? And I still feel that way. And I'm really perplexed by this thinking that seems to be pervasive amongst visual artists. It boggles my mind because if you don't stand up for your rights, you lose them. Musicians knew this with sampling. There are examples in every other art form. And the reason photographers, in my opinion, oftentimes get taken advantage of is bizarre to me, because it doesn't have to exist if they really just all stood together for their rights. And there was a much clearer pathway for them to follow if they were to be in the unfortunate situation that I was.
So what were the details of the Warhol Foundation lawsuit? Weren't there multiple rounds?
The first federal court case, I lost. And the judgment that the court ruled was that when Judge Kodal looked at the Warhol, he saw a Warhol. But when he looked at my photograph, he saw a vulnerable human being. And so I lost. Now, on the one hand, losing to what I consider to be a decision that is not a legal one, it's one that is based on a person's artistic interpretation.
It's very
well. The good part about that was it clearly gave me rights for an appeal.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So that was good. Okay. And even if I had won, the Warhol Foundation was going to appeal it. Right. So at that point, I was $400,000 into legal expenses on the case, having nothing to do with the amount of time, angst, and everything else that I went through. So my husband wanted me to drop it. Every person that I called, including co-rentmeister who had taken his case up to the Supreme Court and lost. Everyone was said, Lynn, get out, stop. There wasn't one person who said, Lynn, keep fighting this. And the GoFundMe was, at that point, $10,000. So when I'm thinking about, okay, if I move forward with an appeal, this is what it's going to cost. My husband's telling me he could have a heart attack. We mortgaged our house. As all of that is going on in my mind, the Warhol Foundation issues another lawsuit against me for their legal fees. Now, I would assume, because I had a deal, if my legal fees were $400,000, that their legal fees had to be $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I asked Joel, in this lawsuit against me for their legal fees, who would decide if they win or not? And he said, Judge Codal.
Yikes.
So I said, okay, well, we're going to appeal. Wow. Yeah. So we appealed, and that went to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. And in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, which was very good for photography, they not only ruled for me in behalf of all 4 factors of fair use, but they ruled all 12 of them. No, first there were 9. There are 9 judges at the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. And they all ruled, if all these documents, by the way, are of public record. And their ruling was fantastic. And it meant that on the books for all the lower cases that would come in, the federal court cases for all photographers, whatever, that I had established a guideline under fair use. Now, the Warhol Foundation appealed that. And where you go from the Second Circuit Court of Appeals of 9 judges to the court of 12 judges, that costs more money. And all along, I was very clear that part of their game was to money me out and wear me down. They were doing a good job. I was fearful I could lose everything, not just for those couple of $1 million, but they continued the lawsuit of suing me for their legal fees. So should I lose at any point, legal fees are now, in my estimation, for what they're spending, maybe like $4 million, then to $5 million, then to, they had teams,
And were you able to stay focused? Were you able to continue to, in your opinion, maintain what you would consider your standards when you went out on a job? Or did you have a harder time staying at that point?
No, I love making work. So that's...
I would think that would be...
a distraction.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, definitely. To do anything that you love doing is a pleasure. The other things, I don't like being angry or hateful. It's not a good feeling. And I was really more angry at the community of photographers.
Due to apathy?
It's saying they're apathetic is like being nice to them. It's so irresponsible. There are people who were fantastic supporters, trying to support in every way they could, not only with money, but with calling their contacts to try to do press things. I know a lot of people in the press, and the press wanted to stay away from it. They don't want to be sued by Warhol. Photo District News wouldn't do anything on it. I tried to get press on the GoFundMe. The Copyright Alliance wouldn't get on board or do anything. By the end, they did write an amicus brief. But along the way, No, it was like, because we have someone from ARS who licenses the Warhol Foundation on our board, or the Warhol Foundation gives money to this organization or that organization. So I was very much dealing with not only an opponent who was incredibly well-funded. They're the richest arts foundation in the world, but they're also the most powerful. They're known for their lawsuits. People are afraid of them. Museums are afraid of them. I mean, I would hear people, all kinds of people tell me stories, and it was just unbelievable to me. But it didn't surprise me in the world that we currently live in, where they just see this as a game. They don't see it like I do, a moral thing of what's right and what's wrong. So to have people like Beverly Ornstein and Howard Schatz supporting me the way that they did. There were a handful. Andy Katz, I'm mentioning these photographers. There were a handful of them who tried to make things happen. And even forget giving money. It's like, could you write about this on your social networks? Could you share this information? It's kind of like they thought, oh, that's Lynn's problem. Or they would say, oh, Lynn sued them to make money because she's just after money. I can't even respond to that. It's so stupid.
So I have a question related to, you were talking about people, in the photography press being fearful about going up against the Warhol Foundation. But from what I understand, at the same time, there was the art press that was reporting about the lawsuit, and their reporting had misinformation or was slanted towards the Warhol Foundation.
Absolutely. One would have to think that when you're as big as the Warhol Foundation, you have publicists and you want people to think well of you. And so you pay your publicists. I'm not saying they did this because I don't know that they did, but it would seem to me that they were trying to make sure that their public face was represented in the best light possible for them. So when Art News, Art in America reported things, they didn't fact check with me. And there were statements in there that were totally inaccurate. I mean, even just now, we had to get a retraction. One was Reuters, and the other one was Art News, where they reported that I knew from the beginning and had authorized Andy to do what he did with my photograph. That's totally not true. And when my lawyer contacted them, they said, oh, we left out the word not, that she did not know.
Oh, boy.
It's unbelievable. And then there would be things like the New York Times ran an article which was written by a person who is actually the official biographer for the Warhol Foundation of Andy. So I wrote to the New York Times and explained which sentences I thought were inaccurate and asked that they should make it clear to their readers when it's a writer that has a connection to the Warhol Foundation. And I never heard back from them, and they didn't publish that. And then the second time, which was years later after the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, they hired the same writer who wrote another article, which was inaccurate. And so those are the kind of things that I would go through. But I accept that I live in a world where not only can that happen, but oftentimes well-intentioned reporters have deadlines and they're moving quickly. And it's not like the old days where people really fact-checked. I think the only one that got the story right during the whole 7 years was the Wall Street Journal. who fact-checked with me. So it's the world that we live in where we keep on questioning what is truth. And part of that is used by individuals to grab power. And so I just felt that no matter what, I had to risk everything because there was no way I could look in the mirror and feel like I could pass from this world proudly if I didn't fight it.
Let's switch over to the Supreme Court rulings and everything that went on over there. Just a couple of points. Were you in attendance before the court during the Supreme Court oral arguments? Were you able to?
Yes.
Okay, so you were there. You were able to see and hear everything that was going on.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right. Also, the Supreme Court ruled in a 7-2 decision in your favor, with the only dissenting parties being Judges Roberts and Kagan. What did you make of the arguments behind this dissent?
With Chief Justice Roberts, from how he asked questions and made statements, I was clear that he was not going to be supportive to me. He said things, which is in the transcripts. It's like how Andy Warhol is in museums and I'm not. And in the Supreme Court, you have to sit there. It's not like you can stand up and talk. Each lawyer gets 20 minutes to give their spiel, and then each of the judges asks the lawyer questions. Well, Justice Roberts, as Chief Justice, is head of the Smithsonian Portrait Museum. And I wanted to stand up and say, I have 4 pieces in the permanent collection of the Smithsonian. So you're sitting on this bench saying that, like, oh, well, Andy's in museums and Lynn, what's Lynn? I just, everything he said, it was made clear to me that he was going to side for Warhol. What shocked me was not only Justice Kagan siding with him, but what's very important is the opinion that she wrote. And in that opinion, she suggested that I was more or less a danger to all artists. And her opinion was so strong that it initiated various individuals to send me death threats. So that was really upsetting.
And this is from words that Kagan said.
Yeah, because I'm an artist and you've ruined it for me, and appropriation is an art form. Yeah,
but what's the difference between what you were doing and Coke preserving the formula of their beverage, which, everybody makes colas, but there's a reason why theirs tastes different from everybody else's and everything. There are certain things that are proprietary. That is a very strange...
Because it's all about the money.
Yeah.
You just picked Coca-Cola, okay? They are protecting that copyright, okay? So it's not about right or wrong or fair or what's unfair. It's about money. And, the Warhol Foundation has that in spades. And there is an investment in the art world in keeping a certain thinking about who he is and his work. So museums, anyone who has a Warhol, they are invested in taking sides with the Warhol Foundation. And then there are just very young artists who I feel don't understand really what is acceptable as far as making art in the art world. And if something is completely derivative as this one was, that's very different than what Rauschenberg, who started the whole movement of appropriation. Rauschenberg would take, whether it was something from a newspaper or a magazine, and it was only like in the corner, right? It was part of the statement of what the piece was about. The Warhol Foundation kept pushing the idea that Andy Warhol was a great artist, and this work represented him making icons out of people. And that's not what I do. Well, I got news for you. When you're in celebrity portraiture, that's your job, or you don't get another job.
Points taken. So now this was all about money, as you keep saying, and you won. Still in all, are you in the hole from this thing?
Yeah.
You are still, despite the fact that you won, you are still in a hole from this whole thing.
Oh, yeah, a big hole. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Well, listen, listeners, there's a listener for a reason, okay? This is something you have to take seriously. This is something that affects all of, even if you're not a professional, all right? You're taking pictures, you still believe in the craft of it. It's the kind of thing where it pays here to contribute. And usually we save this kind of stuff for the end, but I'm going to say it right now. You got a few extra dollars, okay, for the cost of a couple of coffees at a high-end coffee shop, all right? Send some money into this, okay? This is important.
Well, I appreciate that. But the other thing, too, is that they should be sharing about it on their own social networks, because people need to get educated. How I looked at this and the money that has been spent, when this started, and Joel said this to me, when they made that, what I consider to be threat of, take our offer or we'll fight you all the way to the Supreme Court and that will cost you millions. Joel said, Lynn, you're 69. Do you really want to spend the next X number of years fighting this thing? They'll keep you in court, right? And I said, no, I don't really want to, but I'm gonna. And so how I look at it is I might have left that money to, I don't know, Greenpeace or to a university or whatever. So, okay. So instead, it's been spent while I'm alive. But I wouldn't turn the clock back and change that decision based on money. I feel very proud that I stood and fought and that I won. And that now there have been cases that have been ruled on that the photographer, the artist, it has gone in their favor due to the ruling that took place in my case. And that has been posted by various people. I read about one on Pro Photo Daily. And not long after my ruling, there was a ruling in regards to AI that was based on the ruling that came down in the Warhol Goldsmith case. And that was in favor of us. So if I have some kind of legacy at all, then I think that's a pretty good one.
Yeah, you're part of case law.
Now, you brought up something that we kind of tagged on to the very, very end that I'd like to touch on. And you mentioned AI, and copyright law and infringement is arm in arm with this, hand in hand. Do you have any thoughts about how the AI situation is evolving, and just any thoughts you might have on it?
Well, as an artist, I'm really intrigued with AI and want to play with the tools that are there to see what can I make, what can I do. And I'm fascinated looking at other photographers' work where they never even used a camera. They know about photography. One was a food photographer. I think his name is Jonas Peterson on Instagram. But there's nothing real about the pictures. And I did a self-portrait series where nothing was really real, but I did it with photographs and blended them. I did it a long time ago. So that whole idea of the possibilities which AI can give to artists is really exciting. But then how do you deal with the amount of information, the amount of images that needs to be absorbed into an AI program so that you can make those creations? And then, is that creation yours? The courts ruled at first nothing created with AI, can be copywritten. So, I think it will be a very interesting future. I have no idea where it's all going. And I have to say that I'm really glad that in all likelihood, I will no longer be on this planet in my body to deal with all of this. Yeah.
There's a lot there. And it's been a topic, a hot topic on this particular show for a while now. And I've mentioned a few times that a lot of photographers, rightfully so, have what to fear about AI. But I would say that if you're an illustrator, you have even more to fear because AI is pure illustration, whereas photography still can be something where it's kind of locked into a reality, whereas illustration is folly and fantasy to begin with. And this is just perfect for it. So, but yeah, it's a whole new can of worms that we got to deal with here.
Well, it has to do with, once again, we always get back to what's moral, what's right, what's wrong.
Yeah.
And so AI, not just the arts, but in everything, can either be incredibly dangerous if in the wrong hands, someone with ill intent, or it can be used in an incredibly positive way. What will happen with AI has a lot to do with who we are as human beings.
Yeah.
And that's what scares me.
Mm-hmm. And the decisions that are made going forward in the courts, which one does not have that much confidence in these days.
When I knew I was headed to the Supreme Court, I really had to keep in mind that if anyone was to fight this fight, that I was one of the better suited for it, based on being a woman who oftentimes is not thought to be a person of strength and fortitude because she's female. When in fact, being female, particularly being of the era where I was a baby boomer and working in very much a world dominated by a workforce that was male, only made me stronger than any guy out there, because in all situations, it was a matter of proving myself again and again and again. And people underestimate how strong women have to be in life.
Right.
Yeah. So I just thought, I felt like some higher power picked me for this, and that I had to make myself feel like a 1940s film with Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, where there was going to be a happy ending, that everything would work out just fine. And, I was going to prevail.
Yeah. And you've proved your belief that anything is possible.
Yeah, anything is possible. I mean, also the other way, I never expected this to happen.
Well, all the power to you, Lynn. I mean, you really...
Talk about fighting the good fight and winning it. And even winning, what a cost you paid a heavy price to win this.
I did, in terms of my, not just financially.
Emotions, your life, you.
Yeah, unless you've really been in the courts and gone through depositions and the rest of it, it's really hard to imagine the emotional toll that it can take on you.
Yeah, I'm not going to say I can imagine. I can't. Because from everything I'm gathered, this was like a monster undertaking. Anyway, you think we have enough tape?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Well,
So, Lynn,
yeah.
what's next?
Well, I have a book coming out this fall with Rizzoli of Patti Smith, Before Easter After, which is what we call a trade version of my deluxe Taschen book, a book that will be, more affordable than $1,000. So I'll be working with Patti doing book signings and events. And now I'm working on both the Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band book that I did with Taschen. And I'm working on a documentary that's being made on me, and that's quite time consuming. And then there's just day to day trying to make something, whether it's a digital wet plate or, to experiment with new things and to paint. At least between this lawsuit and COVID, I became a painter. So I really feel like, I'm capable of making something which does not require other people and which it's one of a kind. Yeah.
Oh, I get that. In fact, just this morning, I did some touch-up on my living room wall, and it came out real good. Really, really good.
Good. I hope it gave you gratification.
So, Lynn, if our listeners would like to catch up with what you're doing and see more of your work, where can they go to?
I like them to go to my Instagram, which is @LynnGoldsmith.com. And there are many people who are of a particular age that Facebook is enough for them. They won't go on Instagram. And so my Instagram then posts to the Facebook page, which is Lynn Goldsmith Artist. Look for the lady with white hair.
There you go. There's your clue. And all this will be in our show notes as well. So if you didn't catch it, all those links will be listed there. And definitely, we urge our listeners to go follow up on Lynn's work. She's done an amazing amount of work over the years, and it's always something new to see. Anyway, Lynn, it's always great having you on the show. You're a wealth of information and energy. And you love photography. That, I think, is one of the key things of it all, and it shows when we speak to you. You love the craft and everything about it, and it's fun listening to you share all this stuff. And we hope to have you back again to talk about more books and projects, so things a little bit more uplifting than legal proceedings, which unfortunately are part of the game. But again, thanks you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed all your questions and being able to get out some of not only information, but to get out some of my anger.
You can vent here anytime you want.
Thank you very much.
Now, if you're a fan of the show, but not yet a subscriber, head on over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts and click subscribe. You can also find this on the Explorer blog, where we post photos from our guests along with our show notes. And please join us on Facebook and the B&H Photography Podcast group, where you can share your favorite photos and comments about the show. I'm your host, Alan Weitz. Jill Waterman is our creative producer. Episodes are recorded, mixed, and edited by technical producer Mike Weinstein. Our executive producer is Bjorn Peterson, and our editorial director is Sean Steiner. On behalf of all of us, thank you so much for tuning in today.
Thanks to Pelican for sponsoring this week's episode.